Hellyer, a Senior Associate Fellow at Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. First of all, could you give us your take on what is happening in Gaza on the ground at present?
Well, I think it's undeniable that at present, particularly in the north, but I think even across the south, we're seeing increased Israeli bombardment, making it extremely difficult for civilians to find any refuge whatsoever. If you remember, towards the beginning of this conflict, the idea that Israel would target hospitals or target anywhere near hospitals was roundly denounced by so many in the international community, whereas now we're seeing Israel be very open about the fact that it's conducting armed operations that are directly impacting the patients, the doctors, the staff inside these hospitals. And then we're seeing other reports of them saying to evacuate, to go down certain routes towards the south, and then other reports from witnesses on the ground saying that those routes are not safe, that actually people are finding them incredibly unsafe trying to get down to the south. And even Israel also that 1.7 million Palestinians out of 2.2 million Palestinians in the entire Gaza Strip, that their homes are destroyed or uninhabitable. So we're seeing an incredible humanitarian crisis in Gaza, despite the denials from the Israeli forces.
And about Israel's strategy going forward, I mean, Netanyahu just a few moments ago again rejected calls for a ceasefire, but its military said earlier that it will help evacuate babies from Al-Shifa Hospital. I mean, what do you make of this? Israel hasn't exactly shied away from bombing civilian areas.
No, it hasn't. And even Israel's defenders are raising questions in Washington and London about the loosening of the rules of engagement. I mean, of course, they're saying that Israel isn't targeting civilian areas, but it doesn't make much difference to people on the ground that if you're not targeting civilian areas, but you have such loose rules of engagement that if one fighter surrounded by 1,000 civilians, where you think that that fighter is worth the cost, you know, I'm making this up, but the rules of engagement are incredibly loose at the very least. And irrespective of what Israel says vis-a-vis the hospitals, in international law, hospitals are off limits. Medical facilities are off limits. If Hamas is using them in any way, then that's obviously against the rules of engagement as well. But we cannot ignore the fact that Israel claims to be operating in accordance with international law, but has been violating those rules progressively, regularly, consistently over the past month.
And Netanyahu said just a few moments ago that Gaza will be demilitarized after the war and that Israel will continue to control security there. I mean, if Israel does succeed in dismantling Hamas, what could be next for Gaza? I mean, what kind of leadership could form, if any, and what would that mean for civilians?
So first, I'm not sure that Israel can dismantle Hamas. Hamas is all across the Strip and outside of the Strip. It's underground, it's overground. So I'm not sure that they can actually dismantle it unless they completely destroy utterly the Gaza Strip. So that's one. Two, when it comes to maintaining security control, I think Netanyahu is saying the quiet part out loud, that Israel is actually in effective control of the Gaza Strip, wishes to maintain that effective control, which means an occupation. Occupation in international law does not depend on there being settlements or an Israeli military presence inside the territory. It simply means that they maintain effective control over it. So we're seeing the continuation, not a new one, but the continuation of an Israeli occupation over Gaza. And I'm not sure where people think that's going to go. We've come to this point over the past month as a result of decades of a policy, i.e. an occupation policy by the Israelis over Gaza, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. The continued implementation of this policy right now is incredibly bloody, but it's the same policy. It's an occupation. And I'm not sure that we're going to see anything resembling some kind of consistent or constructive governance in Gaza when everything within it, its health infrastructure, its educational infrastructure, even the provision of water and electricity has taken such a monumental beating. We're not talking about weeks or months for the reconstruction of Gaza after all of this is over. We're probably talking years, not to mention all of the death and trauma that has befallen the people of Gaza. They've had to deal with Hamas on the one hand, which already is something I wouldn't wish on anybody, but now they're dealing with the after effects and the impact of an incredible Israeli bombardment of every factor of life in the Strip.